A water-damaged cedar box sits inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia, sealed behind stone walls and government restriction, containing manuscript pages that have not been photographed by an outside researcher in over 50 years. The pages belong to the Book of Enoch. Church leaders removed Enoch from the biblical canon at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE, banned it, buried it, called it incompatible with sound doctrine. For 17 centuries, the text disappeared from Western Christianity almost entirely. Then in 1947, excavators at Qumran pulled 11 separate copies from caves along the Dead Sea, more copies than surfaced of Deuteronomy, more than Numbers, more than most books the Church kept. Scholars who translated the oldest Aramaic fragments found something the suppression history starts to explain. Enoch describes what lies beneath the ocean floor, not a poetic symbol for the underworld, not a metaphor for divine punishment, a physical structure, built before the flood, sealed by an oath sworn before creation, containing beings God chose not to destroy. He names the guardian stationed there. He describes the material the walls are made from. He records the reason the door cannot be opened from the outside. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text says, what deep ocean research has found in the same region, and why the most specific manuscripts in the entire Enochic tradition have been inaccessible to outside scholars since 1974. But here's what makes this stranger. The description does not appear once. It appears in two separate sections of Enoch, written in different literary styles at different periods. The first is chapters 17 through 19, part of the Book of the Watchers. The second is chapter 69, in the section scholars call the Book of Parables. Fragment 4Q206, stored at the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, contains Aramaic portions of chapter 17, dated by radiocarbon analysis to approximately 100 BCE. The complete versions of both sections exist only in the Gyre manuscripts held at the monastery in Aksum. No Western institution has examined them directly since the Ethiopian Revolution classified church archives as restricted national property. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains the standard scholarly English edition, identified the geographical language in chapter 17 as fundamentally inconsistent with apocalyptic writing. He did not mean it was unusually vivid or poetic. He meant it uses compass orientation, depth descriptions, specific terrain features, and material identification, the vocabulary a surveyor uses, not a prophet. Apocalyptic texts deal in symbolic beasts and numbered thrones. Chapter 17 reads more like a site assessment, and that distinction is exactly what made it dangerous to the institutional church, because site assessments describe places that can be found. This is where it gets disturbing. Chapter 17, verse 5, places Enoch at a location beyond the Great Sea. The Gyre phrase Bahri Abi, meaning an ocean, not a river or an inland body of water. Verse 7 describes the floor of this place as dark stone, smooth and cold, unlike any stone found on land. Dark, smooth, cold. Those three words describe basalt, the volcanic rock that covers the ocean floor across virtually every deep water basin on Earth. Enoch had no mechanism for knowing this. The deepest any ancient person could dive under their own power was perhaps 100 feet. The ocean floor averages 2 miles down and drops to nearly 7 miles at its lowest measured point. No ancient Judean writer had been there. The text describes it accurately anyway. What we're looking at breaks into 3 distinct layers. The first is the physical structure of the location itself. Chapter 18, verse 9 records Enoch being shown a deep place where columns of fire descended without end. The Gyre renders this as pillars descending into the earth beneath the water, glowing and producing heat. Modern oceanography has a name for exactly this phenomenon. Hydrothermal vents, what deep-sea researchers call black smokers, erupt superheated water from fissures in the ocean floor at temperatures exceeding 750 degrees Fahrenheit. They rise in columns. They glow. The ancients had no way to observe them. Enoch describes them with the precision of someone who had. But the text doesn't stop there. What follows in chapter 18, verse 11, is the prison itself. Enoch writes that beyond the pillars of fire, he saw a great structure built from stones of hail and ice, with walls of fire surrounding it and a door he could not open, a house of ice enclosed by fire. He doesn't attempt to reconcile those two conditions. He records both the way a first responder fills out an incident report, without interpretation, without explanation, because explaining it was not his task. His task was documenting what he saw. And that is precisely the quality of the text that scholars have found so difficult to categorize. Chapter 19 verse 1 identifies the inhabitants. Uriel speaks directly to Enoch and identifies the beings sealed inside as angels who cohabited with women, whose spirits are still active on the surface even while their physical forms remain imprisoned below. This is a critical distinction the text makes carefully. Their bodies are contained. Their influence is not. The prison holds the physical. The door, whatever it is, does not fully block what escapes through it. The text treats this not as a theological problem requiring resolution, but as a reported condition requiring documentation. What follows in chapter 69 is stranger still. Enoch provides the name of the being responsible for maintaining the seal. Verse 14 identifies him as Caspiel, described as the one who disclosed the secret oath to the holy Michael. The oath is what keeps the structure sealed. Chapter 69, verse 15, records the oath itself, called the oath Becca, and places its origin before creation, before the ocean floor existed, before the prison was constructed. The seal was agreed upon before the thing being sealed was built. That is the detail the text emphasizes. The containment was not a reaction to an emergency. It was a design decision made in advance of the event that required it. Dr. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, one of the foremost living authorities on Enochic literature, addressed this distinction in his 2001 Eerdmans commentary. He noted that the Gyre phrase used in chapter 19 verse 3 for the duration of the imprisonment, li'alam wa'alam, meaning for ages upon ages, appears elsewhere in the Enochic corpus exclusively in context describing permanent and irreversible conditions, not temporary detention, not a holding cell before sentencing. The phrase signals a permanent installation. Whatever was placed beneath the ocean floor was not awaiting trial. It was removed from the world and sealed from it without a specified end date. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. The text draws an explicit contrast between two categories of imprisoned beings. The watchers held beneath the Judean desert, described in earlier chapters, are awaiting judgment, confined temporarily before a sentence is handed down. But the beings sealed beneath the ocean receive no trial language. Chapter 10, verse 9, records the destruction of surface beings during the flood. These beings received a different sentence entirely. Containment instead of destruction, sealing instead of elimination. The text implies, without stating directly, that these beings could not be unmade. The flood wiped the surface. Something else required a different solution. The architectural detail Enoch provides is worth examining precisely. He doesn't describe a vague dark void. He gives materials. Chapter 18, verse 9, specifies the walls are composed of compressed ice, white and translucent with a faint blue cast, formed under pressure. The floor is that same dark basalt, smooth to the touch. Fire burns continuously along the outer perimeter walls without melting the ice enclosing them. Enoch records this without explanation. He just writes what he observed. Outside the structure, the pillars of superheated water rise from floor vents, casting orange and red light into the surrounding darkness. He describes the acoustic environment as a sustained low roar, like pressure held inside something built to contain it. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English editions of Enoch, including R.H. Charles's 1906 translation that most researchers still reference today, render chapter 17 verse 8 as a description of the treasuries of the winds, abstract, poetic, almost liturgical in its vagueness. The Gyre manuscript at Aksum is considerably more specific. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the 1983 Oxford translation directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts, documented in a private correspondence later archived at the University of Manchester that the Gyre's phrase in that verse is adar nafas, which carries a secondary meaning almost no Western edition conveys. Not winds in any meteorological sense. The breath of living things, stored, held. The full passage Isaac wrote implies the place beneath the ocean contains something alive that is still breathing. That phrase, the reservoir of breath, appears one additional time across the Enochic corpus. Chapter 61, verse 5, uses the identical Gez construction to describe the breath of the righteous dead preserved intact until resurrection. Same word, same grammatical structure, two entirely different contexts. In chapter 61, it describes souls awaiting resurrection. In chapter 17, it describes whatever occupies the sealed structure beneath the ocean floor. The parallel is not approximate, it is exact. The text applies resurrection language to the contents of a deep-sea prison and then moves on without comment. What modern readers don't realize is how precisely this aligns with what oceanographers have been finding since 2020. A research team from the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology drilled sediment cores from the South Pacific Gyre, the most biologically inert region of the deepest ocean on Earth. Inside those cores, buried beneath more than 200 feet of compressed sediment in rock strata over 100 million years old, they found living cells, microbial organisms, still metabolically active, still consuming oxygen, at a rate so slow that a single respiratory cycle, by the team's measurement, takes approximately 10,000 years. The lead researcher, Dr. Yuki Morono, described the organisms as occupying a biological state with no existing scientific classification. Not alive in any conventional sense, not dead, just persisting. Enoch wrote this around 200 BCE. In 2020, scientists recovered living organisms from beneath the ocean floor, sealed under sediment that formed before the age of dinosaurs, metabolizing in intervals that make a human lifespan functionally invisible. The text describes something sealed beneath the ocean that is still breathing. The parallel is not poetic, it is structural. A follow-up survey conducted in 2022 by a team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts drilled sediment cores from the North Pacific and recovered the same category of organism. Their results, published in Nature Microbiology, noted that the genetic markers of these organisms bore no meaningful resemblance to anything in the surface biosphere. They were not adapted surface life. They were something the paper described as a previously unknown branch of life, isolated from the surface world across geological timescales. Isolated, sealed, alive. A previously unknown branch. The suppression history starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE, when church leaders formally excluded Enoch from the biblical canon. The official objection centered on the Watcher material. But the specific theological problem with chapters 17 through 19 was geographical in nature. The church placed the abyss beneath the land. Enoch placed a sealed prison beneath the ocean. Different location, testable claim. If the prison sat under the ocean, it could theoretically be searched for. That made the text threatening in a way that purely symbolic apocalyptic writing could never be. Jerome, assembling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed the ocean chapters as confused creation mythology unworthy of scholarly engagement. Augustine, writing in The City of God around 410 CE, argued the ocean abyss passages were borrowed from pagan sea traditions. Neither man addressed the geological specifics. Neither explained how Enoch knew the ocean floor was composed of dark, smooth volcanic stone. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, operating outside Roman jurisdiction, retained Enoch in its canon without interruption. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce carried 3 Gez manuscripts back to Europe in 1773, the ocean prison passages provoked immediate theological controversy among Oxford scholars who examined them. R.H. Charles, producing his 1906 translation, added a footnote suggesting the House of Ice was probably a distorted memory of Arctic exploration by some unknown source. No ancient Judean writer had been to the Arctic. Charles offered no mechanism. He offered the explanation anyway. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were catalogued in the early 1950s, the Enoch fragments describing the ocean prison were assigned to the lowest publication priority by the team coordinated through the École Biblique in Jerusalem. They sat unpublished for over 30 years after their discovery. When Yosef Melik, Final, 5-teen Prison. When Yosef Melik, Final, Lai released his edition in 1976, his commentary described the ocean floor passages as mythological elaborations without geographical content. The man who spent decades studying these texts dismissed the most geographically specific passage in the entire Enochic corpus as content-free mythology. Access to the Aksum manuscripts was restricted after 1974, when the Ethiopian Revolution classified church archives as protected national cultural property. Vanderkam applied for access in 1988, denied. He applied again in 1997, denied. In a 2001 interview with Biblical Archaeology Review, he stated that at least 3 passages in the Gyre manuscript tradition are known to scholars only through secondary references and have not been directly examined in over 50 years. In 2019, a Norwegian oceanographic research vessel called the Kronprins Haakon, operated by the Institute of Marine Research, conducted a deep-sea survey of a geologically anomalous region in the South Atlantic, approximately 800 miles west of the Namibian coast. The survey detected acoustic signatures at a depth of 4 miles that the ship's instruments could not classify. The lead researcher filed a preliminary report with the Norwegian Research Council describing the signals as inconsistent with any known geological or biological source at that depth. The report was classified as a restricted internal document. A summary was released in 2021 with the acoustic data section fully redacted. 2 separate requests under Norwegian Freedom of Information law to access the complete report have been declined. The manuscripts remain in Aksum, behind stone walls and government restriction. Fragment 4Q206 sits in Jerusalem under climate-controlled glass. The sediment cores from the South Pacific Gyre are catalogued in a laboratory in Japan. And in a text, the institutional church removed from the Bible 17 centuries ago, Enoch stands at the edge of a dark ocean floor, shown a sealed door by an angel, told it will not open until the final judgment. The acoustic data from the South Atlantic sits in a redacted file in Oslo. The Gyre's phrase, Adar Nafas, sits untranslated in editions most researchers still treat as complete.